Hi there. My name is Alex, and this is Searchers, a podcast for anybody interested in buying a company. So today I speak to Joe Heieck, and Joe is exactly somebody I think you will really enjoy to listen to. He went to the Navy, to Harvard, found a company, bought it, scaled it, and is now back in the ETA game with Heiton Partners. But let's dive right in. Oh, Joseph, happy to meet you. Maybe let's start with your name and how you became an entrepreneur.
Sure. So, my last name's an interesting one, Hayek. It looks German, but it's actually Czech. It was originally spelled Hayek. The story that's passed down through my family, which is not a good one, but I share it because it's actually humorous because it doesn't make us look that smart, was during World War I, my family was based in New York State, and there was a lot of anti-German, anti-Catholic sentiment in New York State during that time. And my family said, gee, our last name, Hayek, it looks too German. We need to change the spelling of it. So they changed the spelling to Heiek, which only made it look more German than it did before. But here we are, 100 years later, and that's still the way it is.
Nice. Perfect. And was it the lemonade stand as a child? How did we get here?
It's a good question because entrepreneurship wasn't something that was really promoted in my family growing up. I suppose you could say my mother's side of the family has quite a few entrepreneurs going back as far back as I can trace them through genealogy. But my father's side, my father grew up very poor and very, very poor. And the way he worked very hard to get out of poverty, and he put himself through college. And his father only ever rose to the rank of a head janitor at a hospital. And so when my father was in college, he would work with his father at night. And he would see these men in white lab coats walking around, and he saw that everybody respected them. And when they spoke, people listened and they helped people and they healed people. And my father said, that's why I want to be. And so he just went all in on that and eventually became a doctor. And he was a doctor for almost 50 years before he retired. And he got out of poverty, and we were not raised that way that he was raised. And so he came to the mindset of like professional work, a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, an accountant. Those are good career fields to go into. They're highly needed. They're respected. They pay well. They're stable. This is what we should all do. And so I'm number 5 of 6 kids. So that was kind of the message growing up a lot. Interestingly enough, 4 of us ended up being entrepreneurial in some way, and to the befuddlement of my father, but we've all done okay. And so entrepreneurship was never in my mind. When I was in high school, I never liked traditional work. So I always found a way to make a buck. I didn't think of it as being entrepreneurial at the time. I'd film weddings, or I'd film World War II reunions, or I'd film school reunions, or what have you. I would string tennis rackets and make custom golf clubs for people. I would draw comic books and sell them at school. I just didn't want to be like a grocery store guy or whatever, which was kind of the common work there. I never thought of it as entrepreneurial. I just thought of ways of just making some scratch money to go see a movie on the weekend. And then when I got into college, 9/11 happened. I went and I said, okay, I'm going into the military. So business was the farthest thing from my mind. But when I came to leave the military, I really tried to decide what the path was right for me. And one of my older sisters, who's an extremely successful entrepreneur in her own right, said, Joe, for the last 10 years, you've been in leadership. Leadership is really needed in business, and you've got all the building blocks to do that. You should think about going into business and maybe going to business school to kind of recalibrate what you're doing for the business world. And so that's what I did. And when I got there, I realized I would like building things. I felt like I built when I was in the military. I got to have a very unique career in the military. It was very, and looking back, entrepreneurial. I worked in special warfare for intelligence. And so we were kind of very entrepreneurial. We had our missions. We were given a lot of latitude in how we executed them, very different from a traditional military career. And so I really much liked that. I liked building it. But I thought, well, I'm not a startup guy. I don't know how to go to Silicon Valley. I don't know how to code. I don't have any brilliant ideas. I was just in the military for a decade. How could I possibly become an entrepreneur? And then my first year at business school, I went to this conference and they had a 1-hour panel on search funds.
And you didn't go to any business school, right?
Went to Harvard Business School, yeah.
That's amazing.
And so I was there, and this panel is search funds, buy a company and be a CEO, like right out of business school. And I'm like, oh, what's this? And I went to it, and there was 3 panelists. 2 of them were searchers, CEOs, and one was one of the original searchers turned investors, Jim Southern. And it was an hour-long discussion on this thing called a search fund. And I was hooked. was like, that's the path. I burned all my boats in my second year at business school, Alex. I'm like, this is the only thing I'm doing. I didn't recruit. I didn't do anything. All I did was focus on search funds. And thankfully at that time, Royce Yudkoff and Rick Rubeck at Harvard Business School were just in their second year, but it was a full year now of offering their search fund courses, which was financial management of smaller firms in the fall, and then their ETA field course in the spring. And I love those courses, and I was hooked. And so that's kind of where I got there. It was not a conventional path by any means, and it was never something I sought out to do, but I wanted to build something. I knew I couldn't work for someone else. I learned that in the military, and here I am.
And if I just jump in there for a second, I think what's striking already, like, of course, the spark as a child and trying to be independent. But what I learned also during my PhD on entrepreneurship through acquisition, you are so blessed in the US, and in particular in Harvard, in Stanford, in the top universities, to have such courses. In Europe, for example, there is rarely such thing. And the names you just mentioned, listeners, you might know the small red book on entrepreneurship through acquisitions. It's exactly written by those people that Joe just mentioned. So yeah, it sounds like you were blessed of really getting in front of the right people at the right time. And if you remember the course, let's maybe just jump on this in a second. What inspired you so much? Was it the format? Was it a particular case study, a company they bought, or yeah?
It was a few things. Number one, if you read their book, you're taking their course from Harvard. I mean, I remember when I read it the first time, I got to read an advanced draft of it. And I thought, gosh, I'm like taking the course again. So anyone who reads that book, they're taking the Harvard level course. It's excellent. But sitting in their course, first of all, Rick and Royce are very dynamic as professors. They have because they're so different from each other, that plays off this and creates this unique charisma that just pulls you into their material. But then the other thing was, Alex, was that the protagonists from the cases, and I love the case study method. It was so good. And when you're at Harvard, you do like 600 cases. So you look at 600 companies. It's so neat. They would bring the protagonists in each of the cases to the course. And these were all people that weren't too much older than me, and you could talk to them. And they were so open to talking with you after class that it was kind of a unique level of access that you didn't get in the other courses there. And that just kind of just reinforced it, almost became like this flywheel that they created.
Amazing. What was the first step then, though? I feel there are a lot of people out there who are intrigued by the idea, read a lot even, but then nothing happens. How did you get started?
I think the ETA world is still this way. It's a very open world in that if you reach out to people, they're willing to speak with you. It gets more challenging because there's just so many more people doing it now than back when I did it originally. I mean, when I left Harvard, there was 20 active searchers. When I left Harvard, 15 coming out of Harvard and 5 out of Stanford. And everyone said, oh my gosh, there's so many people in the search world now, we're all going to run into each other. And the latest stat I saw in America alone, there's about 240 active searches right now. So it has gotten more crowded. So it's less time to make open to people. But because it's bigger, there's just a lot more people and you can talk to them. So that's the first step. I started reaching out to investors, and I started reaching out to other searchers who were a year or two ahead of me, or a few years ahead of me, who were in the operating phase. And I got to meet a lot of them in person and talk with them. I eventually interned with one of them. And that was, again, talking to the people who are actually living and breathing it every day. And then I saw it reinforced in the classroom with Rick and Royce. It just only furthered my drive and passion to make this happen. And that's what I did almost the entire year, was just that. I spoke to a couple dozen investors, a couple dozen searchers who were somewhere in their journey. That was invaluable for me. And it was almost like a third course in a way, because you get to see how they see the world and how they approach everything. And it was wonderful. So that was the approach. That was the process. I would encourage everyone to do that. It's a little different now in that, Alex, it's a little more challenging in that people raise funds or raise money so quickly, or they're self-funded. And so they don't get to talk to as many people. But, the old ways are the best ways. Just reach out to people, and not everyone's going to say, yes, I have time. But for those who do, really take time to just talk with them. It's incredibly invaluable.
100%. Now, there are forums, conferences. So yeah, I think that's interesting learning, number one. Let's maybe, if you want to directly jump to G Works, how did you then get to this point? How did you find a company? How often did you fail on that path until you got there?
Sure. So my blessings, I would say, coming out of HBS continued in that when I went to raise my fund, I was a little unique at the time in that I wanted to do a regional search, which really wasn't a big thing back then. When I say back then, this is 11, 12 years ago, most people did national. And a lot of people did partner searches. I wanted to do a solo search. And so I really had to find the right investors that were okay with that and aligned with that. Also for me, Alex, I didn't want to have a lot of investors. I cared very much about the mentorship side and focus. I mean, focus is a general theme of mine over the years of focused effort leads to focused outcomes, which tend to be very good ones. And so I ended up only having two investors coming out of HBS. Just happened to be Rick and Royce. So again, the blessing continued with having them, and they were incredible mentors through the entire journey. But they also gave me a lot of latitude. So they gave me some frameworks on how to think about search, and then I went to it. My search at that time, I was searching in the middle of the country in the United States. Most people were searching on the coast, so I kind of felt like I was out there alone and unafraid. And I bought my company within 6 months of starting my search. During that time, I looked at about 300 companies in all different kinds of industries. And the one I ended up with was, and this gets to the romanticism of search, it ended up being just 45 minutes from where I was living. My wife and I had moved back to Omaha, Nebraska, where we were from originally. We very much wanted to be in the middle part of the country and to find a company that is just 45 minutes south of where we were literally living. That gets to the romanticism of search. And it was great. So bought the company, started my search in late June, early July of 2014, and bought my company January 1st, 2015.
Before we jump into to that really, so I heard you were regionally focused. You had a lot, like a rather open industry focus. What about EBIT and like a size criteria? Did you set anything of that up or?
Yeah, so I learned this from Rick and Royce, from just listening to them and then distilling it to what worked for me. And I have kind of 7 rules now for my searching. Don't ask me to name all of them because I might not remember all of them off the top of my head. That's why I wrote it down. But I very much kind of developed it at that time and have kept to it ever since. For me, I was industry agnostic because I was regionally focused. And because of that, I used mostly brokers. I'd say that was 90% of my deal flow. I focused on the business model, at the top of it being quality of revenue and customer concentration. And I went searching about it that way. What I looked for in a business was the following things. I wanted EBITDA or free cash flow. And I say free cash flow because if they have a CapEx component, I would look at free cash flow, not EBITDA, to be between 800,000 and 1.5 million. I thought that was a good spot for me. That's generally meant you'd get a certain amount of employees in the business. I wanted a minimum of 15 employees because that meant there'd be a little bit of structure. My preference was one owner. Once you get more than one owner, it starts to get complicated because people have different desires and interests for their outcomes. And I wanted something that was B2B and had some sort of element to the business, and this gets to quality of revenue, that would bring customers back on a repeatable basis. Now everyone's like, oh, recurring revenue, right? That's kind of the holy grail. But for me at the time, it could be recurring, reoccurring, repeatable. Those were all fine. That all would get to the quality of revenue. And that was kind of my focus going into it. So that's how I approached my search. And I really distilled it among that. I mean, if I got a teaser for a business that was 2 million in EBITDA, I would pass it to another searcher I knew that was in that size range. I wouldn't keep it. And I just stayed focused in that way.
That sounds already quite focused, like a lot of ideas, and you still got to quite a large number of businesses in your deal flow. And maybe let's dial down just for a second on brokers versus proprietary outreach. I feel that there seems to be this feeling, do cold outreach, try to find this nugget that nobody has seen yet. Did you try that your own? Were the brokers really the trick to get to that deal volume despite your focus? Or any learnings you made there?
Brokers absolutely were how I got the deal volume that I got. I was not very great at proprietary. I didn't have a history of that. I was really trying to figure it out. I mean, I was really in the dark with a broken flashlight trying to figure out how to do proprietary. I know how to do proprietary now because I've done lots of acquisitions since, and that's my preferred method now. Mm-hmm. But at that time, it was brokers. And I approached brokers, Alex, like owners. I worked to develop a relationship with them so it didn't feel transactional. And so that they'd remember me. And like I said, if I found a deal that wasn't right for me, I'd pass it to another searcher. Brokers always appreciated that. And so they always got good deal flow from brokers. The other thing I learned that which was really important on the broker space, I had this aha about 6 weeks into my search, was even if you're regionally focused, you need to have a national outreach for brokers because they're dialing for representation. And I looked at deals in my part of the country that were repped by people in California or New York or South Carolina or Florida. So I needed to have a national outreach program for brokers, even though I was regionally focused. And so that's where most of my deal flow came from. Now that, go forward a decade later, 12 years later, I've learned how to do the proprietary thing. So my preference now is proprietary. And today that's where most of my deal flow comes from. It's flipped. I'd say 80% of my deal flow now comes from proprietary, 20% comes from brokers.
And we're really close to jumping into the company you found then. There's one last question. What does it mean you went personal with those brokers? Did you drive to them, had a coffee with them? Did you have a fancy website already? What would you recommend people today?
I actually have a post on Search Funder about how websites just don't differentiate us in the search world because everyone has the same website. There's some guy looking off in the distance from a mountaintop, or there's a buffalo or a lion in the on a plain somewhere all by itself. Like everyone's websites look the same. So it's not a way to differentiate yourself. Just like with owners, I would get in front of them, physically get in front of a broker. Now, if you have a national outreach, that's can be expensive. So how do you do that? Certainly, if anyone that was within 3 hours of me, I just drive to them and meet with them in person so they could get to see me, shake my hand, look me in the eye, know I was a real person. And when you make a physical human connection like that with anybody, right, Alex, like it just feels different and they're more willing to share with you than before. For everyone else that was national, there were these associations at the time. They still exist, but in this post-COVID era, I don't know if they still do these things. They would put on these regional conferences. So these are associations like Corporate Finance Associates, CFA, or the Association for Corporate Growth, ACG. They would put on regional events throughout the country where capital providers, entrepreneurs, thinkers, and intermediaries could all come. And I would go to those. I went to two, and across two, I met with dozens of brokers in person. And that was incredibly valuable because over a 2 or 3 day time, you're like speed dating, it feels like, but you're getting in front of people and they're still getting that physical connection with you. And so that was the other way I did it. But that was what I mean by personal connection, literally getting in front of them where they're looking at you from across the table and they can shake your hand.
Amazing. And I feel like as much as technology has progressed, that thing didn't change. It's still about humans and humans making connection. And it's easy to hide behind deal flow tools, websites, whatever, but actually going out there, yeah, pretty interesting. But then you found your company. You had those two investors really close to your home base. What happened then? Like, how did you get the rest of the money? Let's start with that maybe. And how did the deal go about?
Yeah, so it was a good deal. It was a very small tech consulting company called GIS Workshop. It was doing just a little over $1 million in ARR when we bought it. But it had 15 employees, one owner. It had very good repeatable revenue. The recurring part of the revenue was less than 40% of total revenue, but a lot of the other revenue, which was kind of one-time consulting work, was repeatable, meaning a lot of those clients would come back every 2 or 3 years and buy additional consulting services. So there was a repeatable component to it that we had some confidence in the quality of revenue, and then we bought it at a good price, and, we were, I think, appropriate in the amount of leverage we took. We did about 2.5 times EBITDA on leverage because we thought the quality of revenue was such that it could support it. And then the rest was equity. And, that's a big learning that I always took from my original investors is quality of revenue is so important. A lot of people nowadays say, oh, it's not as important. I think it is the thing because there's this follow-on effect it has right down to the amount of leverage you can take. The amount of leverage you can take, it directly correlates with that risk of that quality of revenue. And the appropriate amount of leverage is a great way to drive good outcomes and returns for your investors and then for you as the searcher, because you want to get in the money as soon as possible. So for me, even now today, like quality of revenue, that's like the thing I hone in on when I'm looking at a business. And so that allowed us to do that 2.5 times on EBITDA for debt, which we were comfortable with. And then the rest was equity.
And could ask so many questions, but maybe two from the top of my head there. And how did you approach financing back then? And would you say that changed or you would do it differently these days?
So I did not do SBA. Due to the nature of the structure of my search with my investors, SBA wasn't an option. And rightfully so, my investors were not going to take a personal guarantee on SBA debt. And their logic is sound. And I subscribe to this logic. If you look at a capital stack, you have the senior creditor at the top, then maybe you have some sort of seller note, and then the equity is at the bottom. Just by the nature of that capital stack, the equity providers are taking the most risk. Why would they then guarantee the top of the stack and basically own all the risk in the business? No, that's not going to happen. So that meant we could only go commercial. And you kind of want to build a bake-off auction type process with commercial bankers if you want. I approached many and I ended up getting term sheets from 3, and then we went with 1. Now with the one we went with, they all had a personal guarantee, but for me as the searcher, but not for the investors. I was totally okay with that because I barely had 2 nickels to rub together coming out of business school. I have no assets. I have no problem taking a personal guarantee. And then the business was as such that we were okay. I was always totally okay with that. And that personal guarantee is a big thing. As an investor today now, because I'm on the other side investing, I would never sign up for a personal guarantee as an investor. I'm already taking the most risk as the equity holder. So why would I guarantee the top of the stack? And so that was the approach to debt. So we went commercial. So that means it had covenants. It wasn't a 10-year amortization. It was a much shorter one. And this was before commercial banks really got into the ETA world. Now there are more commercial banks that do it. So the terms, you can get much better SBA-like terms now out of a commercial bank than before. So that's great for everybody in the market. But it wasn't that way back then. And I was okay with that just because of the way we went about the business coming into it. I knew we were going to be okay so long as I focused on the right things,
Mhm.
which we can get into in a bit. But that was kind of the approach to the whole financing side.
Interesting. And how can I imagine your setup back then? You had two amazing mentees, investors. Was it just you? Did you have services like accountants or anything booked, quality of earnings? Or was it just you and a laptop?
Nope. Thankfully, with my investors, they had a quality of earnings provider, they had lawyers, they had all the things we needed to do the due diligence. The only thing we didn't have was a tech due diligence provider. I went out to find that one myself. And there's lots of ones out there. So the ones we used at the time, I don't even know if they still exist, but they were fine. So we brought that to the table. And I should say about due diligence, Alex, the way we approach due diligence, having now been through a private equity due diligence process where it is a full body cavity search every single day for like 3, 4 straight months, that was not our approach to doing a due diligence for a search fund deal, just because time it kills deals, right? Seller fatigue kills deals. We were very mindful of that. So we identified like 7 core things we wanted to confirm or not confirm about the business as we knew it. I mean, it's called confirmatory due diligence for a reason. We honed in on those. And as long as those all 7 checked green, we were going to do the deal. The rest of it, we just take as hair on the deal, right? So what are examples of those 7? Obviously, the quality of earnings and proof of cash is a big one. Technical due diligence is a big one. Customer analysis and retention analysis was a big one. Legal due diligence around, the formation of the company. Is there any legal issues, any of that kind of stuff, especially around tax? That was an important one. And then we had a couple other smaller ones that we sprinkled in. And then the other thing we took to our approach with our due diligence was that we staged it. So the first couple of weeks, I did all the analysis myself, and that was on customer analysis. So do they actually have as many customers they say they have? Can we match contracts to all those customers? And is the retention and the revenue per customer what they say it is? I can do that all on my own. And then the other thing I did all on my own was a very high level proof of cash. The quality of earnings provider is going to give you a very detailed one, but you can do a very high level proof of cash yourself. And are you roughly within a variance that you're happy with when you do it yourself? If so, then we move forward to bringing in the providers, Q of E, legal. We got really underway with the bankers and all that. And the reason I did it that way is to control the broken deal risk of a deal. If I could not confirm those 2 things during those first 2 weeks of analysis by myself, we would just walk away from the deal and we didn't have any broken deal costs. We just had time. And that was our approach to due diligence. I still follow that approach to this day. All the acquisitions I've done over the years, I follow the exact same approach and I think it's effective.
Mhm. Sounds amazing and quite systematic as well. Now that we learned about how you got the deal, how you did financing, how did the deal unfold? Like, what did you do? Because as far as I saw, you stayed with the company for quite a while. What happened?
Post deal. So over 10 years, I'll give you kind of the high level and then kind
Yeah.
of go a level deeper. So
Mhm.
over 10 years, we really morphed as a company into what I call a horizontal single point software solution to a vertically focused ERP for the local government market. So we did that transition. That was part of GWorks' story. The other thing is we went from 15 to 140 employees. We 20x ARR. Our client base grew by 2,000%. So when I stepped out of the role of CEO into chairman, we had 2,500 local governments as clients. We did a bunch of M&A during that time. And so that's kind of like the big kind of outcome sheet of GWorks. And 7.5 years in, my original investors left and we brought in a private equity buyer to kind of take us through the next phase. If you were to break down that 10-year journey, Alex, into like 3 acts or 3 phases, act 1 was what business am I in? Act 2 was building the platform. And then Act 3 was scaling the platform, which is still going on right now. And so Act 1 of what business am I in is really understanding like, what are we actually doing as a company? What is the way forward for us as a company? But also inherent in that is protecting cash, improving your cash conversion cycle, paying down debt, things to de-risk the business, to increase your margin of safety while you take the time to figure out what business you're in. And you figure out what business you're in by being persistently engaged with your customers, getting in front of them often, with your employees and with the market. And so there's really good data from Stanford many years ago about every searcher kind of goes through this journey, this first phase, whether they know it or not. And it's somewhere during year 3 on average that you kind of figure out what business you're really in. And that was certainly true for us. It was about mid-year in my third year. So about 30 months into the business, I had my aha of like, this is the business we're in. Thankfully, by then we'd paid off all of our debt. We'd already started doing some of the things to hone and focus the business. But then we understood what we were, and that took us into the second phase, which was building the platform. So that's accumulating the assets through M&A and R&D. That's getting your systems and processes in place. That's starting to build, I'd call it a bona fide go-to-market process where you, the owner and CEO, are not the number one sales driver, or one of your other managers is not the number one sales driver. So when I came into the business, there's 3 managers, and one of them was the COO, Janelle, who's my business partner now with Heiton Partners. And she went the whole journey with me the whole 10 years. And she was like, for the longest time, our number one salesperson. Well, at some point, the COO can't be the number one salesperson. You need to start to build a legitimate sales team. The other part of building the platform is getting your pricing, positioning, and packaging down for your offerings, because now you're focused. So that's building the platform. And once the platform's built, now you get into scaling the platform. And when we got to scaling the platform phase, that's when we brought in the private equity firm, because we knew they had the experience, the know-how, and the resources where we could really start to do that. So, phase 1 of the journey was really kind of let's call it the first 3 years. And then phase 2 was kind of the next 4 years. And then scaling was the last 3 going on currently now. And so that's kind of the overall arc of GWorks over the last decade.
Which is an amazing story, I think. What I found really interesting when I first learned about ETA, what you just described is amazing and brings you to rockstar dimensions in this world. But you don't have to get there, actually. Like ETA, if you pay a multiple that's fair and just a few years EBITDA, you can basically just keep the ship constant, get your debt back, as you mentioned, and then you earn good money. People listening to this is really like the dream where you're hearing here. But even just buying a solid, stable business and keeping it afloat and like at slow growth even can make this business interesting. Compared to startups, like 99% fail. I think just on that alone, and we have to acknowledge the fact that phase 1, Joe, as I just heard, don't be a know-it-all. Start in phase 1, understand what kind of business you're in. I think that was really interesting, because the rest you can only get to when you know what kind of game you play.
So you make a good point, right? It gets back to what do you want to do in search? What is your end goal? For me, I wanted to prove I could build something. I could take good and go to great. And I wanted to build a business that scaled to some sort of material impact. Not that I got noticed for, but that the business did. And I wanted to that's what I wanted to do. That's what I set out to do. And that's what I did. I didn't know for sure that was possible until I figured out what business I was in. And that, again, took 2.5 years. But like you said, like you can get into ETA, and I just want to build a really good lifestyle of business that does really good with free cash flow because of where I am in my life. And that's what I want to do. You can go be successful doing that in ETA too. There's lots of ways to win in ETA, just like there's lots of different ways to do ETA. And so, Alex, like I think that the point underlying the point that you made was you got to start with what you're trying to achieve and what your outcomes are. And that's, again, the romanticism of the search world. You can find what you're looking for in ETA. If you're willing to put in the work and the grind, you can do that. I just so happen to want to do this. It was a ton of work. It was a tremendous amount of grind. It's not something I necessarily want to repeat with just how much work it went into it, but I did it, and I'm glad I did it. And thankfully, I had some really good people with me along the way. Building the platform for us, I just want to like highlight this point. It's just sometimes just not knowing better can lead to good outcomes. So my number 2, Janelle, who's my COO, also became my chief product officer, built our client success team from scratch as we were going through Act 2 of building the platform. She built our product team from scratch. She had a tremendous amount of influence over the engineering part of the company. And once we accumulated assets in the GovTech space, the space we were in serving local governments, most of these are legacy assets that have been around for 30 to 50 years. So they're on-premise desktop software. We knew as part of our vision, we needed to create a cloud native ERP ecosystem. And so we thought, well, we'll just build it ourselves from the ground up. We already know how to do it. We already know what we need because we have all the desktop side. We'll just build the cloud version of it. Did not realize until I stepped out of the role as chairman how incredibly hard and unlikely it is to pull that off. And yet Janelle was incredibly skilled and she pulled it off in a very few short years. And that's one of the great things about we had with having a private equity backer to help bring the resources to do that. But again, it's unique for what we did. It's very hard to pull off, and we did it. I think part of it is because we just didn't know any better. We're like, let's do a thing. Okay, go do the thing. But because we chose to do that. And it gets again to the point, like you can choose these things you do in search. I think the phase one or the act one is really important because you de-risk a lot of things, uh, and kind of you get to that point of not to use. It's really not a better phrase to use because I know it's a gambling phrase, so it's not a great one. But you're playing with house money in a way. You've increased your margin of safety, which means you can be a little more risk taking, still calculated, but a little bit more risk taking on your experiments you run on how you build your platform next.
And if we now look into a few more unconventional learnings even you made, either there are some directly on top of your mind or maybe it is a nuance or a topic I would, for example, be interested in. You went into tech, and I feel that there are a lot of people now looking to buying a tech company or not even, and the landscape changed so much in recent years. We have AI coming, we have generative AI, LLMs. Nobody knows what is happening. Would you again go into the direction? Any learnings you made, anything about that would be amazing to hear about.
Well, let's start there with where the world is today. So there's a few things to pull back there. Number one, the role of AI. We leverage AI quite a bit in GWorks over the last couple of years internally, and we'll be using it more externally over time with on the customer delivery side, but certainly internally in engineering, marketing, sales, operations, it has a place. And so I still have this conclusion today, but it can still change just with the rapid change in LLMs and as that market matures very quickly. I would not want to be a point solution in software. I wouldn't want to be a solution that solves a single pain point with AI today. I think there's tremendous risk there because the cost to build is going to zero. And so the pricing power, the pricing dynamic changes. I still think that there is a moat for someone like GWorks who has an enterprise level software package in a very regulatory dynamic environment where there's just so much complexity and rules that there's so much unstructuredness to it too, because what one city does for certain ordinances for payroll versus another city in the same state can be drastic, that it is difficult for AI to solve that today. Is that means it's future proof? Not necessarily, but you have enough of a runway to keep a moat and start to leverage AI tools to remove and optimize some of the cost structures so that if the cost to delivery does go down, you're already prepared for it where you can still have some margin protection. That's my general view of where AI is today. And that's, again, today, September of 2025. But the other thing about tech in the ETA world is, uh, the role of multiples and the type of business you're buying. So there's kind of two different kinds of tech businesses you can buy. You can buy a business that's already cloud native and growing, and you're going to pay a higher multiple for that for sure. And so the name of the game is growth. You got to grow that top line to justify that multiple within, I'd say 24 to 36-month period. What does that then do to the searcher? You are narrowing your margin of safety and increasing your execution risk. That is a lot to put on a new CEO coming into a business. I like margin of safety as a new CEO just because you get to make mistakes and not blow up the ship. And we need to make mistakes. That's how you learn. That's how you grow, right? You got to fail forward. So that's that world. The other tech dynamic that's out there that people can buy is like a legacy software system, something that is written in an old language and is on-prem. And what do I mean by old language? Because I've seen these and I've bought these. I mean like VB6. I mean like Fox Pro. I mean like COBOL, right? Old stuff. Those software packages also aren't growing very much. What does that mean? It means you can get them at a more attractive multiple. However, because the AI threat and just the nature of the world today, you will need over time to probably bring that to the cloud. Now that's an R&D spend, and R&D is always way more than you think. And in a way, you are still paying over time the same multiple that you're paying for a cloud native business. You just don't see it because it's hidden in the R&D expense to build out the cloud version of software. Now, what's potentially an advantage with the buying the legacy stuff that kind of mitigates that multiple in a way? I would say this. They tend to be very good at free cash flow. So most of the tech businesses I bought that were legacy, their free cash flow margin was 20 to 40%. You buy a cloud native software company, their free cash flow margin is probably zero because they're growing so fast, they're sucking up all their cash. The beauty of that then is that you can bootstrap with the free cash flow to build the R&D tech over time. And if you're in a market that is slow changing, but needs to change, and there's a regulatory component to it, as long as you focus on the client success aspect and the client experience and the client delivery, that client base will give you the patience to build out the new cloud version over time. And you can leverage your free cash flow to do that. That's what we did at GWorks, and it worked very well. And then when we brought our private equity buyer, they brought in additional resources and we just went to the moon on it. But that is the benefit, I think, of legacy to do that if you want to go that path. So it's just, they both can work. They both can have the same great outcome. I think it's just important for people to know the dynamics of when they're looking at both. And over time, you're going to end up spending the same. uh, and kind of in terms of multiple perspective, but what's funding that multiple difference, it does matter.
If we look at further learnings you made, first of all, what were they and how would they change your approach if you would start again?
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about unconventional learnings. I don't know if these are all unconventional or just learnings that one has to go through. I'd say number one, when you come into a business, so much of small businesses, their culture is the personality of that owner, that founder owner. You have to build a culture from scratch, and therefore you have to be very intentional from that. Because from a leadership perspective, culture building starts on day one when you don't know the business. You have to be very intentional and very consistent and persistent with building your culture, and it never ends. It's a huge, huge undertaking. I certainly took that for granted coming out of the military. I was in the Navy for a long time and has 200 plus years of tradition and norms and culture. To think of that up front, that was a lot. That was a lot to take on right away. But I enjoyed it over time because you're really kind of building a neat culture. The other thing I get asked a lot by searchers is, does it matter? Do you have to like the industry you're in? Yes, no, I ended up really liking the GovTech market. But when I tell people, oh, I'm in GovTech, no one ever said to me, oh, Joe, please tell me more, right? No one ever did. Like GovTech, they're like, oh, boring. But within that, I loved building. I loved building something and nailing it for the customer and trying to really deliver on the client experience. And then, people like Janelle and others in my business that really took that and owned it and really went from there. Like that is tremendous. There's tremendous satisfaction that comes out of that. I ended up very much liking the industry I was in, but going into it, I had no feelings for it. I just wanted to build something. And so I wouldn't let that inhibit you as a searcher from, if you like a business, but you're not sure about the industry, don't let that be a stopper for you. Oftentimes passion comes out of just being in something and doing it and building. Just keep that in mind. I'd say that's another one. This one is one that I really came to know over the last few years, Alex, which was scaling a business. You have before scaling and you have after scaling. And then there's the in between when you're scaling. I've come to believe that most people in this world don't want to be in the middle part, which is the messy part. When you're before scaling or after scaling, there is already a sense of stability and security and predictability. When you go through scaling, all that goes out the window because you're trying to do something that's hard and fast and big. And so it doesn't feel predictable. It doesn't feel safe. Where in the reality it might be, it doesn't feel that way. And so a lot of people, that's not appealing for them. And that's not wrong. As human beings, we like security, we like stability, we like predictability. And so most people do not fit in a scaling company. I'd say 95% of the people that don't. And when you're scaling and so growing fast, it becomes a challenge to find the 1 out of 20 that are right. And so what happens is you end up hiring a lot of people that aren't the right fit, and you have to then deal with the struggle of turnover and continue to find the right people while you're scaling. It's an incredible challenge. I can see why a lot of companies end up not scaling and why someone just says like, I've hit my limit. I don't want to take this business any higher. Or once you're on the other side of scaling, there's just like a different water you're in. That I was not expected. And that was really important learning for me to see. And again, there's nothing wrong about it. It's just the reality. A couple of other things I'd say that just to touch on real quick on unconventional learnings is sales should always be ahead of operations. If you perfect operations for where you are today, you're perfecting it for a homeostasis environment, for an environment that's going to change because sales changes. And I think it's okay for operations to always lag behind sales. It's always going to play catch up. That's okay. And I think you just need to accept that as an organization. There's a saying that traditions are solutions to forgotten problems, meaning that, traditions exist for problems that occurred, who knows, millennia ago, that people have since forgotten what the problem was. And so that's why the tradition was the solution. And then people do away with traditions. And then these old problems come back and people are like, well, how do we solve these? And I use that as to say is that the old ways still work. And this touches on earlier parts of our conversation. Cold calling still works. Getting in front of people physically still works. Visibly fighting and leading from the front for your team, it still works. The old ways still work. And I see a lot of searchers eschew that in terms of tech tools and automation. And I love all that stuff too, but should use it as a way to make your ability to execute the old ways even better. And you shouldn't avoid those. So I'd say that. the dichotomies of leadership are real as a leader. I knew this in the military, but I didn't really come to understand it really well until I actually was running a company. And some examples of the dichotomies of leadership is you're friendly but not friends with your staff. You're accessible but you're aloof. You're empathetic but dispassionate. You have to balance all these dichotomies. There's lots of them. Jocko Willink wrote a really good book on this. You have to balance those all time. And it feels like a razor edge because you're kind of you could get it wrong or get it right in any given moment at any given day, because as a leader, people are always watching you. That is something that's very much true, and people should be prepared for it. And no, that's okay if you get it wrong one day, you can get it right the next. But you got to really take those to heart, because what a business leads coming in, even if it's day one, they need to see that you are a bold, decisive leader that has strong character and is always going to operate in the best interest of the company. And then therefore the employee, even if they don't like what you do, they might know that in the long term, it's the best thing. I mean, I made some really hard decisions over the decade, but you know what? Over a decade, the average employee made 3 times at the end of 10 years what they made at the beginning of my journey. And our benefits increased about 3x during that time too. I made a lot of decisions along the time that people didn't necessarily like, but it turned out to be everyone's benefit. You have to have that boldness and decisiveness to do that as a leader. I'd say the final thing, and this is an uncomfortable one to talk about with people because I don't think they like to admit to this, but I do think it's true. I'm very much speaking the truth kind of person, good, bad, or the ugly. I'm going to say what the truth is, but I'm also going to say, frame it for what does this mean going forward? How can we leverage and transmute this into something positive going forward? You always have to pair it with that truth with how we make this better going forward. I don't think a lot of people, this has been a very hard lesson for me and I still wrestle with it, and I'm not going to change my stripes, unfortunately. So it's one I'm going to learn again in the future. I've come to see, and I can say this for enough with 20 years from being in the military and then 10 years running G-Works. A lot of people don't want to hear the truth. They want to be told what they want to hear. I think it gives them a level of comfort. I think it adds to a level of security. Even though they don't know that they're on thin ice and the ground might break beneath them, they don't want to be told that. They want to know everything's just fine. I'm sure there's a benefit to doing that. I don't see it just because integrity and honesty are very, very important to me. But that's been a very hard learning for me. And I'd say that's the most unconventional learning I've had is that part. Speaking truth versus telling people what they want to hear. I'm always going to err on telling the truth. But I see a lot of leaders just focus on telling people what they want to hear. And then they have really engaged teams, very dynamic teams that are winning together. So there's obviously some truth to that works too. It's just something I don't think I'll ever get comfortable with as a leader. And I own that.
I could keep listening for hours, I think. Let's maybe get a bit more tactical. First of all, I'm still interested to learn how G works then. What happened to it? Like you became a chairman, what you're doing today. But before we go into that like transition phase in your current company, are there any like simple tactics? Now this was a bit meta even of how you think about leadership and business in general. Are there specific stakeholders, tools, processes that still stick to your mind that are really like easy learnings?
So books are good ones to just generate ideas. Books are meant to be descriptive, not proscriptive. So books are very helpful in figuring out what works for your business. And the first one I'd say is the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I think it's by Ben Horowitz.
Yeah.
Meaning like there's all these frameworks right out there, Alex, on how to do things. But in reality, your business is still unique from everyone else's. And there's no playbook directly for your business. So these frameworks are frameworks for a reason. You still have to figure out what's bespoke for you and then do that thing. And so that's a really good one that came from that. I'd say another couple of good books are books called The Phoenix Project, which is actually a novel, but it's about a novel about business. I love that book, and that the idea I took out of that was this idea of creating lanes in a business. So you have lanes on a road, cars go one way on one side of the road and they go the other way on the other side. If you have a 1-lane road and both cars are going in different directions, you're going to get a car accident. Kind of one of the ideas around the Phoenix Project is that you and your business need to understand what are the outbound lanes for your business and what are the inbound lanes. And you need to separate them so that they're distinct, so that you don't have head-on collisions within your business. And we would do that. So we reorganized our business where we had outbound lane work and inbound lane work. And so that if you're a person on an outbound team, you only did outbound related work. Or if you're on an inbound team, you only did inbound related work. It's a very simple thing, but it's very powerful in how it changed our business. I was just thinking about lanes. So that was a very simple thing. I would encourage everyone to read The Phoenix Project just because it's a novel, so it's fun to read. But some other books that I'd recommend that are just good for generating ideas for people is books like Scaling Up or Traction, same general ideas around how to run your business. How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling by Frank Petker. This book was written during the 40s. This guy was an insurance salesman. He was like a failed baseball player. He became an insurance salesman. but it's that idea of the old ways still work. And it's his approach to sales and just engaging in people in general. It's a very good book. And it's all about the human element of what we do as people in business, because inherent to business, right? It's an organism, are the people. And the business, that book very much focuses on that. I took a lot from that. And then just a couple other things are things like, I really like the book Influence. When I was in the Navy, I did naval intelligence. So we spent a lot of time around behavioral psychology and behavioral influence and that kind of stuff. Influence is all around that. Just understanding how people think and act. You can be more intentional with how you engage somebody, which makes you better at meeting them where they are, to use a phrase with leadership. That's another good book. And then I'd just say, with leadership in general, just remember you are a leader and a manager. I think they're distinct. Leadership is around North Stars and organizing people around that North Star, and then training and equipping those people, and then leading those people to row in the same direction to achieve an outcome. Management is around management of processes and things like that. So in my mind, they're distinct. And I think if you do that, you can think about how you approach your leadership and management as the chief executive. So I'd say that for that. But we could get real simple, like have internal messaging, keep your tech stack simple. Don't get so complicated with it that you can't onboard and train your people to be successful. Another thing that we found successful with our employees was like clearly define their roles for them, have a path that they can see. This is easier when the business grows, but like, this is your role. This is your responsibilities. This is what you're responsible for and accountable for. These are the outcomes you drive. These are the decisions you own by yourself. Like you can make these decisions. If you have a decision that's not in this, you need to go up a level to your supervisor. They have their own decision rights. Just defining that for people is incredibly powerful and empowering them, where you can entrust them with a lot more because they know what they own. They know their left and right lateral limits. It's a tremendous amount of work that took us a long time to get right and get down. In fact, it's an evolution. That is tremendously powerful. It's a simple thing, clearly defining everyone's role and what they can do and not do.
Maybe quickly on those 2 points. First of all, management levels and standard operating procedures. Would you, if you now find a new company to buy and there's not a management level in place, is that rather a pro or a con for you? The same with SOPs. Should they be there? Should there be standard processes, certificates even?
So it's not a deal breaker for me. That's one of those like hair on the deal you just accept. Generally, there are not SOPs when you come into a business. Generally, there's not a lot of management. In fact, in the 10 acquisitions I've done over a decade, I'd say the rule of the day is, Alex, is that anybody that's listed as a manager in the business is not actually a manager. They're just the best at what they do. And there's only true one manager, and that's the founder owner. I would say I was very fortunate and blessed to have an exception. When I came into G-Works, when I bought it, there was 3 managers at the time. Turns out I had one, which was Janelle, my COO. So I was very fortunate to have her coming in. And then, then she and I just built that thing going from there. I was very fortunate from that. But generally, when you come in, there's no managers. It doesn't bother me. Not having SOPs is not going to kill the deal. That's my opportunity to add value and take it from good to great. And so I just have to be mindful of that coming in. I got to make sure I have a swim lane for the transition process to develop that. And then here's the beauty of it. It's a great way to talk to your employees. It's a great way to talk to your customers. Try to understand what these things are and map them out. It gives you a line of bearing to follow with them for a very natural conversation. And then you can put all that stuff down in paper. And the great thing about today, you can use lots of AI tools where it just records it and transcribes it and then turns in an SOP for you. And then you just polish it off. Did not have that 10 years ago when we had to do it all manually. So it's actually it's an opportunity for you to add value early on to demonstrate to your employees and to your customers how much you care about the business. So it's not a deal breaker. If it has it, that's cherry on top. But to me, it's just hair on the deal because it's probably not going to be there.
Now over to what happened to G-Works and where are you now? What are you doing?
Right. So we brought in private equity buyers 3 years ago now, BV Investment Partners out of Boston. Top quartile, PE firm, very experienced in the tech space and with GovTech, really understood the vision, I'm totally behind our vision. So they were a good partner to bring in, really helped us accelerate it. In fact, I mean, we've been growing tremendously since then. But I knew that there's going to be a point where I don't think I could take it any further on the scaling journey. And we really needed to bring in somebody who knew how to do that because they've done it before. And so as I was getting closer to the 2.5-year mark under our private equity owner, I knew I was starting to get to the point where like, okay, the execution risk is higher. The things we're doing next, I have no experience with. We needed to come and bring somebody in who's done this before. And they know what to do. They know where the roadblocks are. They know where the pitfalls are. They know where the opportunities are because I have no idea. It's the best thing for the business. It's very hard for me personally to step away, having built this thing and seeing my vision come to life over a decade. And also like at this point, when you go with a business that scales very quickly over time, you yourself as a leader end up inevitably becoming a roadblock and a choke point for other people because you know everything and you're scaling so fast. Everyone keeps coming to you for stuff and it really wears you down. So I knew it was time for me to step aside and bring in new leadership that knew what to do going forward. And so I stepped aside and I stepped in the chairman role where I could still help from a historical context, strategic context of knowing the GovTech space, M&A, because I really know the market and I know a lot of the people in the GovTech world. And we brought in new leadership and they've taken it from there. So that's what they're doing now. They're continuing the journey forward. They understand what to do to go to the next phase. A few months after I left, my number two, Janelle, she ended up stepping out too, very much for similar reasons, because she had built GWorks client experience team, its product and technology team herself from scratch over a decade. She knew all the customers by name. I mean, she's pretty much met all of our customers face to face. She'd been there for the entire journey and had built this incredible apparatus, not to mention our software that we now everybody's using, that she too became an obstacle. She too became a choke point and is really important for this next phase. Same thing for her. So she stepped out and then we were just talking back and forth about what was next, what we were doing. She was thinking about doing a search herself. I had this Holdco idea I was playing around with and we were just talking back and forth. And then sooner or later, we're like, you know what? Let's just combine forces and do this together. We'll do a self-funded holding company. And that's where Heiton Partners came out of. And so our goal going forward with Heiton is just, we hope it'll be another alternative in the ETA space. The number one, so what's the thing that keeps people out of searching, Alex? It's failing. It's failing to buy a company, or it's buying the wrong company and then failing afterwards. That doesn't mean they're not good operators. They just don't want to do the search. And I can't blame them. It's not easy to do a search and do it well, and then go be an operator and be a successful operator. That's hard to do. Well, we are good at buying companies, Janelle and I, and we're good at building them. So with Heiton, what we're doing is we're doing all the search. We're buying the companies. And we want to buy a small portfolio of companies over time. And then we will put the CEOs in place. So we're de-risking that upfront search for people, and they just come in and they get to be the operator. Now they have to deal with all the risk after that, but they'll be under our mentorship and guidance. And the bar will still be very high for them, but they get to come in and do what they truly want to do, is be an entrepreneurial leader. And so that's the first part of our mission, is doing that. And then the second part of our mission is developing the next generation of leaders, just like I was developed in the military through leadership, just like I benefited greatly from Rick and Royce and their mentorship over a decade, and from the private equity owners. We now get to do that for the next generation of leaders, which I like very much. So bringing in young leaders that we can develop into just outstanding leaders in business, we want to do that very much. And a big part of that is, one of the tough things with search nowadays is that self-funded searchers generally don't have a board. They might have advisors, but if an advisor has an equity stake, they're not really vested in your outcomes. You're not going to get that level of mentorship that you would from a board member. Well, for those that do have boards, I very recently at a Stanford conference, they talked about how a board member today is on anywhere from 12 to 25 boards. Well, how are they going to provide mentorship and guidance? I mean, at that point, they're just doing the fiduciary role of a governor on the board, right? They cannot provide the level of engagement and access that CEO needs during a very critical period, those first few years of when they're trying to figure things out. Well, with us, we're going to limit how many companies we own. And again, I kind of learned this from my upbringing in this world, and it's all going to be under the umbrella of Heiton. So, Janelle and I are going to be your board, and you're going to be part of the board, and you're going to get a lot of engagement from us in mentorship and guidance over the time, so that you can feel confident. And not only that can you make mistakes and fail forward, but you're going to grow and be successful because you have someone who just has a vested financial interest in you. They have a vested kind of human leadership development in you as well. And so that's our approach to Heiton. And we hope it'll be another alternative for people that go into the search world, that, hey, if they want to get on our bench of potential leaders in our businesses, they can. And then when we have one, hopefully there'll be a fit, and then we can put them in. So that's what we're doing with Heiton. We're just a few months into it. We've already got really good deal flow going. We're already developing deals. Very excited. We're going to keep the momentum going. Our goal is to acquire a couple of companies in our first year, and then 1 to 2 a year thereafter, until we kind of hit the limit of where we want to be, and then just take it from there. So we're pretty excited about getting this underway, and being fully in the search world again is tremendously satisfying.
I can imagine it. Geographically, I guess the scope is the entire US, beyond?
Pretty much. Yep. Pretty much. Yep.
And who is the ideal target candidate? Maybe he or she is already listening. Is there one?
Yeah. So we're not for everybody, right? I mean, some people are going to be dead. Some people want to do the self-funded search. Some people want to do a traditional search. So we're not for them. Who's the right kind of people we're for? We're for people who I obviously don't want to do the search part. They just want to lead and be entrepreneurs. Who are those types of people? Well, first of all, there are people that might go off and do something else right out of business school, but this is in the back of their mind. Jim Southern has, I think, a very well-known quote out there, which is, the longer you work for someone else, the longer you work for someone else. So they tend to at some point fall into the trap of they're always just going to be a W-2, even though in their heart they yearn to be entrepreneurial. So we're a good fit for them. Get on our bench. And if we have an opportunity, we bring it to you. It might be the opportunity where you can jump and go be an entrepreneurial leader. And you don't have to take that risk for you and your family of that search phase up front where you got to live on rice and beans and you might fail. We're good for them. We are good for self-funded searchers who may have a limited runway and they're going to give it a go, but they understand the failure rate's very high and they want a safety valve out there to still be entrepreneurial leaders if it comes to it. We're a good fit for them. I'd say we're a good fit for veterans just because I'm a veteran and I have a bias for that. I'd say we're a good fit for people who are very mission-driven, service-oriented. I'd say have kind of a grounded moral compass on how they see both the world and business and how to operate in business. We're good for people like that, and we're good for people that want to be hands-on. We're not spreadsheet people. I mean, we use spreadsheets, but we're about getting our hands into it and leading from the front. So those kinds of people. It's a wide swath of people. We're even good for people that are 10 years out of business school or never went to business school, but they have a lot of experience. And I don't want to say we're limited to people with MBAs. We're not. And they just want to have an alternative out there of where they could get their chance. I was blessed because people have given me a chance over time. It's great to be in a position where we can give others a chance to step up and make something out of themselves for them and their families and lead and then help us too, right? Because we want to build for our families too over time. So it's open to a lot of different type of people. What it comes down to though, as always, Alex, is like, what do you want to get out of this? If you want a concentrated cap table with people that are caring, that want to develop you as a leader and you get to be entrepreneurial, but maybe, the risk isn't as high as somewhere else. So mitigated risk, potentially the outcome is not as potential as going a different route. But that also means the downside is capped as well. So if you think of yourself as like a call option, where you have, or maybe not a call option, would it be like an iron condor? If you're familiar with options where you limit both the upside and the downside, we're kind of like the iron condor of the search world. I think that's a good way to put it with it. I just came up with that. I'm going to remember that. But that's what we're kind of like. We're capping the downside. The upside is mitigated too, just because we're reducing a lot of the risk for you coming in. But that doesn't mean you can't have a great entrepreneurial career and outcome and build wealth for you and your family. That is our goal. And part of our goal, again, coming from like the Rick and Royce tree of doing this, is getting you into the money sooner. A lot of searchers wait to get into the money to the very exit. The focus we take with kind of our phased approach to how we run and build a company is we want you as that chief leader to get into the money as soon as possibly without, that makes sense for the business. Because once you feel like you have real ownership and partnership in the business, it just takes on a whole different level of passion and effort, which I think leads to even better outcomes. And so that's part of our goal too.
Sounds like a really promising offer. How can people find you and reach out?
Yeah. So if they go to heiton.com, Heiton.com, and go to our contact page, they can just fill out an online form, says like what they're interested in doing. And then we kind of have an application, get to know you process right after that we put you into. And hopefully there's a fit on both sides because we want you qualifying us as well. And then you kind of go on our leadership bench. And part of that process is to know what your geographical preferences are. Unfortunately, Alex, today we're only limited to the U.S. So maybe one day we'll come into your neck of the woods. But today we're limited to the U.S. But like once we know where your geographic preferences are, if we have a deal in your market, we'll bring it to you. And you can pass on one deal, you can't pass on two. And then, we vet you for it. And if it works for both sides, then we would bring you in as a leader.
And that's how we started, from spelling your last name to spelling your current company.
That's right.
I think it was a fantastic journey, and to just recap, like from the father figure who inspired you to amazing professors who founded a lot of the thinking on ETA, who exchanged with you, became your mentees, to the military which trained you and gave you a lot of insights, to G-Works. I think it was a fantastic journey. I hope you people listening to this enjoyed it as well. Reach out to Joe. I think it's a fantastic story, a very interesting offering. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Thanks, Alex. Good luck to you. This is great what you're doing. Thank you so much.
And that's it. That's the end of Joe's really inspiring and hugely successful story. If you want to hear more stories like this, I think there are two things you can do now to help me out. Subscribe to this podcast, number one. And number two, reach out to me with any kind of feedback or recommendations of people I should speak to. Contact me at alex@searchers.com. And that's about it. Have a nice day.